we're going to talk about and discuss is the evolving role of NDRMF in the emerging climate challenges faced by Pakistan. NDRMF's mandate is not limited to reducing physical risks of disasters, but it's also to address socioeconomic risks and fiscal vulnerabilities. We're increasingly getting exposed to more and more of these, and therefore I think it's critical that we reevaluate, reframe, and have a relook to see how can we best use a fund that can be utilized to strengthen resilience in the country. This can only be done through a programmatic approach. This will also require a new strategic shift so that NDRMF can position itself to play a more meaningful role in the crises that the country is likely to face in the coming decade. It is now my pleasure to invite the Deputy Chairman, Planning Commission, and the Chairman of the Board of NDRMF, Dr. Jahanzeb Khan, to please come and deliver the keynote address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. So, in my understanding, this is a very important session because we have people who have responsibility for the National Disaster Risk Management Fund. And over the last some months or years, the fund has evolved in a certain manner. We at least have two directors on the board here. I also happen to be chairperson of the board. We have the CEO, other functionaries. I think it's an important moment because the fund has gone through a transition, has had some challenges, some difficulties, and is now evolving into a more result-oriented organization to be able to deliver, to make a difference. So this discussion in the context of COP28 at the venue is important because people who are looking at this closely are also thinking about how this addresses the challenge that not only Pakistan has, but the climate agenda, which is so important for Pakistan from a number of perspectives, particularly the vulnerability aspect of the country. The fund had started as a resilience outcome organization, as the name also implies, and also to manage the risk that this kind of vulnerability brings to the country. Over a period of time, it has implemented many projects which have contributed to the well-being of the local communities, has made difference in the life of people who were faced with such threats. But I also ask this question myself and say, how have we impacted the overall policy framework of investments in the country, not only in public investment, but also in partnerships, and also giving a direction to private investments to make them more resilient and to face the threat that Pakistan has from the climate change. So I think one of the points I'd like to submit to you for your work ahead is to see how we can impact the policy side. The second is how can we impact the plan side. The country is now preparing its next 5-year plan, and it's a good moment to have the plan oriented as a climate agenda. Climate change is not a segment of the development planning. It is the development planning. I think that point has to be kept in perspective. And thus, a huge role for the fund because it also happens to be affiliated with the Ministry of Planning and Development as well as the Planning Commission. So, together, leveraging the capacities that this brings, the convening power, the ability to influence policy, not only in the federal government but also in the provinces, I think this is a work which has been cut out and has to be taken up with great energy, vigor, and relentlessly. The third area of interest that the fund must have is to become a first rate resource center to assist the government of Pakistan and the people of Pakistan in the agenda of climate change. We don't have many institutions. We have limited capacities, limited resources. So, in my understanding, the fund must take up this responsibility. If, as it was, to be the resource center for the government of Pakistan, to assist all ministries in their work to harness specialized knowledge and technology and information from within and from outside, bring together a network of partners who would support the government of Pakistan and its institutions to move forward to tackle the challenges that come before us. So the third point, which is very important in my view, to act as a reservoir of knowledge and assume a central role in bringing together a lot of technical expertise. The fourth and the final mission that the fund must address and focus upon is to train and equip mostly young people, but also technical resources to generate a reservoir of human resource in the various disciplines that are emerging as areas of threat, be it agriculture, water, climate finance, infrastructure, and to equip the country with the kind of human resource that is required to implement these plans. So there are four areas in my understanding which have to be just in parallel, in tandem, so that the National Disaster Risk Management Fund can become a center point for this. This would not take us away from our central focus, which is to continue to influence policy plans, to finance projects that have a bearing on the larger development agenda. So while that central pivot is kept in focus, these four circles around it put together, in my view, can energize the fund to discharge this huge responsibility that is before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jazef, for setting the tone by recognizing the importance of partnerships and the need for building on stakeholder strength to enhance the scope and redefine the role of the fund. Disaster risks and finance go hand in hand. It is the integration and the intersectionality between the two that was the raison d'etre for the NDRMF. Since it was set up in 2017, a lot, however, has changed. And there is also a need for the fund for the NDRMF to evolve and adapt. To discuss this, we have a very good mix of people over here. We have the CEO of the fund, we have a board member, we have a development partner, and we have representation from the government. So I will begin with the CEO as with my first question. Mr. Bilal Anwar, since its inception, the biggest disaster that NDRMF had to cope with were the floods of 2022. How has that changed thinking at NDRMF about anticipatory risk preparedness? And given the scale and scope of that disaster, how do you think NDRMF now needs to redefine its role and transform its intervention strategy to meet the emerging threats and challenges that the country will be faced with?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Aisha, and thank you to Chairman Saab for setting the stage and uh, expressing the confidence and also a kind of a pathway for NDRMF to move ahead. Um, Very similar, exactly on the same lines. This is the strategic framework which the board of directors have agreed, and now we are putting in the details into that strategic framework and devising the implementation plan for that. Now, this is very closely linked to your question, Aisha, because yes, last year flood was a turning point for Pakistan, for not only for Pakistan, for the rest of the world, and actually showed to the rest of the world that if it happened in Pakistan and these kind of the challenges and the threats, it of course can happen in any other parts of the world as well. Now, NDRMF, it was a yes. I mean, given the scale and the gravity of the challenge, of course, NDRMF was not prepared for that, and it wasn't really exactly aligned with our mandate as well. But then, when a flood of this scale hits the country, and of course, no one can remain idle, and we were also part of the efforts. But at the same time, given that, it basically give us an opportunity and shaken us up to look into it in a more holistic, in a more kind of a forward-looking manner, and then how NDRMS is placed, if this is the new norm, if this is the new reality which the country is facing. And then at the same time, we realized and we found out that these kind of challenges might not be unprecedented. They might not remain one of those events which might happen in 10 years time period or 100 years time period. So the studies, the models, the research work has been showing us for quite some time. And the last year flood actually just kind of strengthened that belief and the understanding that this is what the climate action and the climatic challenges which we're talking about. This is here, and this is what we have to deal with it. Now, to build on that and to take the understanding and how to position ourselves, we actually started looking into if our mandate, and that mandate is the resilience building. So we looked and tried to unpack the resilience agenda, that what kind of challenges and what kind of threats which the country is going to face. Physical risks of disasters like the floods last year is one such disaster, but then that's not the only kind of disaster which an institution like NDRMF has to deal with it. So we looked in a broad spectrum. We looked into a lot more holistic manner, and not only the physical risks, but also from in the context of human capital scarcity in the country, as well as fiscal and financial disaster, or the challenges which country can face. And that is the kind of a focus and the essence of our new approach in moving ahead. So if you allow me, I'm not going to go into a lot of details here, because other board members, other colleagues can elaborate a little bit and present their perspective on it as well. So what we have done is, of course, we have integrated the disaster risk reduction. This is one of the typical or the classical function of NDRMF, and given the challenges, it is going to remain very tightly and neatly intact as part of the work program of NDRMF for a good length of time. At the same time, we have looked and we have tried to integrate the climate change concept or the perspective in an overarching manner into everything which we are doing. So disaster risk reduction also have a very close and interlinked climate change aspects which need to be integrated, as Chairman said that it's not a segment of the development planning, but it is the essence of it, and this is how we are actually dealing with it, and this is how we are integrating with it. At the same time, one particular area in which we, under the guidance of the board, we have been actually focusing ourselves quite a lot. This is about the knowledge creation. This is about the different innovative data tools and the applications, and that's based on the understanding and the work and the observations which made that this is a huge kind of a knowledge gaps in the country, and no one is actually have that kind of a consolidated and comprehensive data base, and no one have that kind of a capacity to build on that database and undertake the modeling work and then come up with the analysis, knowledge products, knowledge creation, knowledge information products, which actually can inform the policy work, and it can also inform the implementation framework as well. We know that there are colleagues sitting here as well from Planning Commission, and Pakistan have a quite a sizable budget for PSTP, and the number of projects which are approved every year in PSTP, they're not really risk informed, they're not really climate proof as well, and the DRR component in many of those projects is largely missing as well. So this one particular area is we want to basically fill that knowledge gap, and this is the NetCat model which we are implementing right now, and this is going to be becoming operational in the next couple of months. So we believe that this is going to be filling that gap. At the same time, it is going to be providing that the kind of information and very valuable knowledge for policy reforms as well. And this is going to be allowing us institutionally preparing us to contribute into the policy work as well. I think the third component is kind of a streamlining our implementation, and we have spent quite a considerable effort in doing that, and that actually resulted into a easy flow, easy access, as well as an outreach to our stakeholders. And we're seeing some of the results of that, but we understand there's a lot more work is needed to be done there as well. The one area, the last point I want to just touch base very quickly is the disaster preparedness. And because one lesson learned from the last year flood is no matter how much prepared you are, there is still gaps, and there is a gap for coordination, but then there is a gap for in kind of an institutionalized approach for preparedness as well. And this is again where we are actually preparing ourselves, and we should be able to contribute quite considerably in that particular area as well. So I think this is a kind of a quite a huge menu of the reform work and restructuring work which is going on right now in NDRMF, and we are very excited because the kind of support we are receiving from our board as well as the broader set of stakeholders and the development partners as well, which is phenomenal, and this is basically infusing our confidence as well. Thank you.
A new strategic framework is needed. It's reassuring for us to know that the fund is keeping one step ahead of the crisis and thinking both holistically and strategically. Good for you, Mr. Bilal Anwar, and best wishes for the fund. I will now go to Mr. Essen Tessi. The World Bank has provided financial support to the fund. As a development partner, what are your expectations from the fund, and what are any plans that you may have for expanding cooperation using innovative strategies for engagement?
Sure. Thank you so much, Aisha, and thank you for organizing this important event. It was very good to hear the Chairman Saab's views at the outset. I think if I can just take one step back, I do want to recognize that after the 2005 earthquake, the country had realized the need to move towards an ex ante mechanism to address disaster risk or climate risk. And the institutional mechanism that was developed at that time, uh, unfortunately, it didn't. It was very good at responding to disasters. We haven't really seen it, fully being utilized to invest in disaster risk. So it's a very good sign that the government of Pakistan decided to set up a fund like NDRMF, which is dedicated to investing in risk reduction in an incentive manner. The fund has obviously, as Chairman Saab mentioned, it's gone through an evolution as development partners. We've not only been witness, but also been partners on this journey of evolution with them.
I think we mentioned this many times earlier as well. At time of each crisis, whether it's COVID or floods, uh, NDRMF has also been used as a response fund, which is not ideally geared to be. However, the financing has been utilized for these purposes. And similarly, when the bank had invested with NDRMF, we had at that time the government had launched its ecosystem restoration program, which was a large-scale program to address climate change and invest in ecosystems that were being degraded, and very innovative ideas at that time. But unfortunately, the floods obviously changed not only the development priorities of the country, it dragged, caused a lot of drain on the public sector resources, including funding from the World Bank that was then eventually repurposed to respond to the floods. But we've also seen, like I said, NDRMF evolve as key partners. We do want to see them succeed in a number of areas. We are working with them closely on a few innovative areas. We do feel a fund of this sort can be a knowledge hub, something which Bilal Sahab also touched upon along with Chairman Sahab. They can really provide state-of-the-art analysis, analytical products that can form policy recommendations. And given the challenges that Pakistan now faces on the climate front, uh, you know, the sky is the limit. Areas such as urban flooding, such as early warning systems, such as nature-based solutions, there's a really need for in-depth research, and NDRMF can be that institution in Pakistan that can anchor all that knowledge. Not to say that there's no data available in the country, there is a lot of data, but the problem is that data is spread across many departments, it's not being coordinated. So first order of the day is, of course, an institution to sort of bring it all together and then create new knowledge to continuously inform policy changes and policy reforms. So that's one area that we do see sort of strength emerging, within institutions such as this. Then, of course, it's very well placed to address climate risk and particularly attract climate financing. Pakistan has been really making the case for more climate financing, whether it's international, whether it's from local sources, but more funds need to be tagged for climate finance. But do we really have the delivery mechanisms in place to channel that funding? After the 18th Amendment, as we know, after the revolution, a lot of the sectors that address climate, such as water, agriculture, they've been devolved to the provincial level. There are capacity challenges at the provinces, there are financing challenges at the provinces, and of course, policy is being met at the federal level. So I do see NDRMF as an arm of the Planning Commission, well placed to bridge that gap between the federal and the provincial mechanisms, also to channel financing and target it towards where it's of most impact. And as development partners, we can help them think about more strategic areas, so not just run of the mill, typical embankments, but something that really has an impact on the entire ecosystem, on the entire sort of climate landscape. So these are some of the areas that we do feel that NDRM is well placed, and as development partners, we can help them. Another good thing that we've been discussing with NDRMF is, as part of their reform or repurposing, they're looking at developing a project financing or project preparation facility. Right. So the challenge is that even if a lot of funds, international funds, were committed to Pakistan for climate change, where would you actually put them? What is the absorption capacity? So a facility like that within NDRMF can look at strategic projects, develop them. Our biggest challenge is that Pakistan does not invest upfront into developing good bankable projects or even programs. There are initiatives launched. We have the Indus Living Indus. We have the 10 million tree tsunami, but it's not, or the Recharge Pakistan. But it took a lot of time to get them up and running. We didn't really invest them upfront, and there's a certain transaction cost associated with that. And of course, with the limited fiscal space and competing priorities of the country, you need good bankable projects that that can be pitched and be prioritized for funding. So that's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Essen. You mentioned the ecosystem restoration initiative, and I do remember that how much excitement and buzz there was around it, and then due to some unforeseen circumstances, it could not take off. But it's good to hear that there are many innovative ideas that are shaping the new thinking at NDRMF, and it's disappointing that some of the initial ideas that you mentioned about, like the ecosystem funds, were left as unfinished agendas. But I'm quite hopeful that there will be new partnership opportunities and new pathways where you can plot trajectories for engagement that will create the sort of reshaping, reframing, I think, giving a new face to NDRMF to address all the challenges and issues, because we do have so many in the country and we do need an institutional approach to take that agenda forward. And here, Nadia, I will bring you into the conversation because development starts with planning. So, how do you plan to go about by embedding risk planning and risk financing across sectors using NDRMF as the vehicle for delivery for disaster proofing the country?
Thank you, Aisha. So I'd like to say that the floods of 2022 were not the first emergency or disaster that NDRMF saw. Before that, there was COVID, where we saw a whole lot of financing that was dedicated for ex ante preparedness, for disaster preparedness. It was reallocated on an ad hoc basis to an ex post response. And at that time, we should have uh, ring fenced or brought in so that for next or subsequent disasters we were uh, able to ring fence it only to disaster preparedness, the funding, instead of ad hoc budget reallocation. So this is where your question is that how can risk analysis uh, help us plan better. So right now, we are NDRMF is operating at. There's a layered approach to risk to disaster risk response, right? So the first is your retention layer, where you have budget allocations or ad hoc budget allocations. So right now we are operating at ad hoc budget allocations. We have to go towards contingent financial products and also market-based instruments or risk transfer instruments. And NDRMF has made considerable progress. I'm happy to tell you that they have developed a NatCat model, which is doing comprehensive disaster risk analysis, which can inform. We know what we have an understanding of what our highest risk assets are, what our most vulnerable populations are. So, and depending on the severity of these assets, and we can identify projects. And for low risk projects, we can have traditional risk retention instruments. For higher risk projects, we can have high severity projects. We can have contingent credit facilities and bring in domestic banks and mobilize funds for bringing in for disaster risk response. And then we can also, for very high risk projects and assets, we can bring in insurance. So NDRMF is working towards a layered disaster risk finance to be able to identify what the various projects are in terms of risk, and then allocate and then mobilize funds accordingly. Yeah.
Thank you, Nadia. You said that floods 2022 was not the biggest disaster that NDRMF had to cope with, and you mentioned COVID. Rightly so, but from what I recall, all the initial call for proposals that came to NDRMF were about flood protection. So initially, I think its mandate was sort of confined and limited. But the good thing is that while COVID was a huge tragedy for the global community and for us in Pakistan, it has opened the opportunity for us to look at NDRMF as the fund that needs to expand its role. And I think that's what we're looking at over here. How does it also evolve and keep one step ahead of the kind of challenges that the country will be faced with? And how can it position itself to provide the kind of response that we need in the emergencies that we are not even anticipating or likely to happen right now? So with that, Mr. Ali Tokir Sheikh, I will come back to Bilal if there is more time. But for you, I saved you for the end because you are an expert on climate and finance, and you're also a board member of the NDRMF. So what I'd like to know from you is, what is your advice to NDRMF to shape its future strategies to cope with emerging climate challenges, and how do you assess its performance so far?
Thank you. And thank you for asking a very difficult question. Um, when I was listening, starting with the chairman Saab, I was trying to think or listen graphically instead of listening the words. So first I thought these are 5 tiers within which, and then I started populating with what CEO said. And when I came to our development partner, I thought maybe I should, instead of circular, I should think of a grid. We have 5 things to do, and you made several points of operational interventions that can be made. And by the time that we heard Nadia, I could also see there's a potential gap between supply side driven products that we have developed and demand side. How do we reach and use them optimally so that there is a return on these investments? But by the time you asked me this question, I think now the rubric is one way to explain. While the chairman Saab has said what the board expects, or this is the guidance that we can provide, and that is beautiful. And I think what I heard from World Bank is absolutely important, that these are critical areas and opportunities that exist for Pakistan to work on. I want to talk a little bit of alignments, I think, based on my learning in COP. There are certain alignments that we need to think of. First alignment is that every investment, every piece of work that we do has to be aligned with at least two international obligations. One is the Paris Agreement, and second is the SDGs. SDGs is very important for us because it touches everyday lives for people. And then there are at least two domestic policy instruments. I think we need to learn to align them more closely with them. One is the NDC, which is our nationally determined contribution, sovereign commitment. And second is whatever policy document we choose, and right now the most important policy document that will emerge will be the 5-year plan. We need to be a little bit forward looking. There are other documents also, but they'll become probably somewhat subservient. Okay. And then um, after these two alignments, I think we also need to think of um, two very important developments that have happened, which have crystallized at this COP. One is many of us may have known that at this COP, $57 billion were pledged. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Uh, but almost all of that is contingent on private sector leveraging, private sector engagement, private sector blending, and therefore it's not only a good proposal writing in future, and not just the accreditation to Green Climate Fund or some other fund, but it is also very critical now that how best we leverage private sector. And governments are typically no good. We have tried, and we are not been not very unsuccessful, but we don't have a thumbing success also in public-private partnerships. But augmenting that to another scale, another speed, another level, that will become a challenge. Just to give you an example, um, Dubai-based banks have pledged $30 billion to generate $160 billion of private sector, and that is 6 times leveraging or more. Now, some of the easiest countries for them to work with will be Pakistan, and one of the easiest countries for us to work, one of the easiest pledges for Pakistan to translate will be Dubai. And Mr. Chairman, sir, you're sitting here. My apologies if I'm wrong. Please correct me. Now here, both countries' commitment to climate change is a little less than their other overriding concerns. Our other overriding concern is very, very limited fiscal space, and their overriding concern is diversifying resources of national economy. So the question is, in leveraging private sector, how best we be able to leverage our transactions with a particular sovereign, that's in Dubai in this instance, with other possible venues available. It's a very difficult matter to crack. I don't have solution for this, but I want to draw your attention that uh, I think you're the richest citizen of Pakistan. I think you're the richest citizen of Pakistan. While everybody else is looking for dime and pennies, you're sitting on ton of money. The question is how best we can leverage what you have and what role Putin plays. And you're leveraging, even if it is 5% in an agreement with a sovereign fund like Dubai, it's a health fund, it's an agriculture fund, it's a DRR fund, it's urban planning fund, it's concessional lending from the MDPs. So in range of activities, my vision is to see if you can be on the table with your equity. If you bring your equity into any fund, any transaction, your ability to become a sustainable